Eric Nylund's Halo: The Fall of Reach, the video game Halo Combat Evolved, and William C. Dietz's novelization of said video game, The Flood, were all tremendous hits. The Fall of Reach and The Flood were both Publishers Weekly bestsellers, and Halo CE had sold 3 million copies by July 2003. Halo Combat Evolved was the killer app for the Xbox console. This clearly wasn't just another video game. Microsoft and Bungie had a potential franchise juggernaut on their hands, and that meant a sequel. Halo 2's development would be notoriously troubled, but while fans waited for the game as its ship date was delayed again and again, there was Halo First Strike, a new novel bridging the gap between Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 2, released in December 2003. Once again, Eric Nylund was returning to pen this book, but the world in which Nylund was writing was a very different one than just 2 years before. The Master Chief wasn't just some guy on a box looking intimidating. He was a character that had been fleshed out and explored. Fans had come to love the colorful cast of characters. They had created fan art, fan fiction, spun theories about where Chief and Cortana would end up. Nylund was stepping back into a universe at once more expansive and simultaneously more constricting than the one he had left. The good news was that the brutal 7-week deadline of The Fall of Reach had been replaced with a much more expansive 16-week window, although Nylund would later recall that despite the extra time, First Strike was a tougher book to write. There were more expectations, more lore details to keep track of, and certainly a lot of fan feedback to the first 2 novels, which Nylund took under consideration. As with The Fall of Reach, Nylund passed sections of the book as they were completed off to Microsoft Franchise Development Group member Eric Trotman for an editing and continuity pass, with Trotman sending them along to the publisher at Del Rey. Nylund had to serve 2 different groups with First Strike. Fans of the video game, where Master Chief was seemingly the only Spartan in existence, and the conflict with the Covenant revolved around a single ship on a distant ring, and the emerging expanded universe fans, who knew about things like ODSTs and insurrectionists and wondered what happened to the Spartans left behind on the doomed planet of Reach. At the same time, Nylund had to steer clear of Bungie's work and avoid anything that would step on the game's toes. So perhaps that's why a large part of First Strike is spent rewinding back from Combat Evolved to the battle for Reach and replaying events. In The Fall of Reach, the planet barely fell in the last fifth of the book. Here, though, Nylund gives a much closer look at the doomed defense of the planet from the perspective of the Spartans left behind. In particular, First Strike is really the first deep look into the character of Fred, whose perspective the book in fact opens with as he assumes command of Red Team. Given that Fred essentially becomes the second most important Spartan character in the series, the groundwork for Denning's later utilization of the character and his differentiation from Master Chief begins here. It's also the first time we really see just how badly things went on the planet. Nylund kills off or severely wounds 10 Spartans in the first 14 pages, and methodically picks off more throughout the novel. At Reach, the myth of the Spartans' invulnerability crumbles in an instant. Despite the best efforts of Red Team, the generator complex they are defending falls, and with the Mac cannons in orbit disabled, the Covenant begin to glass the planet. The remnants of Red Team fall back to a mountain complex, linking up with their Spartan mother, Catherine Halsey, and are left trapped on the planet and presumed dead. Switching to the Master Chief side of the story, First Strike starts right at the end of Combat Evolved, with Chief and Cortana drifting in the wreckage of Installation 04 after having destroyed the ring to stop the Flood and Covenant. In short order, they pick up a few more survivors: Spartan Linda, still in cryo after injuries sustained in the Fall of Reach, Warrant Officer Pulaski, ODST Corporal Locklear, Oni Spook, Lieutenant Haverson, and most importantly, Sergeant Avery Johnson. Pulaski, Locklear, and Haverson are, generously described, thinly sketched, but Johnson gets the first touches of shading on a character who would ultimately become tremendously important to the universe. In Combat Evolved, Johnson had been just one of many Marine skins, albeit one with a fair amount of scripted dialogue. But fans loved the character, and so he just didn't stay dead. And while Bungie would handwave his survival for casual fans in Halo 2's opening, it was First Strike that we get a deeper character element for him. From the start, First Strike makes sure to thread the needle to please casual and hardcore fans and incorporates elements from established lore. Johnson's love of flip music and everyone else's distaste, along with the ODST's general dislike of the Spartans, reappear. Cut content, such as the floating engineers, also make an appearance. Not every new piece of information led to major changes, however. The book reiterates the undercurrent of Cortana not being right since spending time in Halo's control room, a recurring story beat that ultimately was one plot thread left discarded in the wider universe. So too is the mysterious Covenant AI aboard the Covenant flagship Ascendant Justice. Other elaborated or new elements would be more successfully grafted into the fabric of Halo, such as Cortana's trick of creating copies of herself. The small detail of strangely familiar alien controls hinting at the later concept of a Gesh also returns here from the Flood. The book also puts in effort to bridge the events of Halo 1 and Halo 2, introducing new weapons like the battle rifle or enemies like the Brutes. Characters who would be important in the upcoming games, such as the Prophet of Truth, Tartarus, and Admiral Hood, here mentioned as having hair, also pop in for brief cameos, though they take a backseat to the main story Nylund tells. Through some classic Nylundian space maneuvers, Chief and company board Ascendant Justice and take it back to Reach, where Catherine Halsey, the Spartans, and a few others, including Vice Admiral Stanforth, have survived holed up deep in a UNSC installation. Their survival is down to the Forerunner relic the Covenant know to be in the same vicinity, a crystal with strange space-time effects. The crystal would later have major ramifications for the universe, being explained as a Forerunner slipspace crystal and playing a role in Shadows of Reach and Divine Wind. Within the novel, however, it mostly serves as a MacGuffin for the Covenant and UNSC to jockey over, and more curiously, as the catalyst for one of the oddest footnotes in Halo history, currently the only real use of time travel in the franchise. Master Chief and company, leaving the events of Halo Combat Evolved on September 22, 2552, end up back on Reach on September the 7th, and the rest of the events of the novel takes place through the 13th. Why the novel decides to add this temporal anomaly is unclear. Trotman ascribed it to the haste of a tight timetable, and presumably it helped fit the events of the novel safely away from the events of the upcoming Halo 2. In terms of the character growth in First Strike, though, the story is really a tale of Chief and Halsey's personal journeys. Halsey got into the Spartan project with a dash of mad scientist and focus on the greater good, but as she sees the wounds inflicted on her Spartans and the crumbling of her grand plans with Operation Red Flag, her utilitarian beliefs begin to crumble. Tired of sacrificing individuals, Halsey abducts Spartan Kelly and heads to coordinates she discovered hidden in files belonging to the dastardly Colonel Ackerson. Before she leaves, she sets up a moral choice for Chief, whether or not to reveal to the UNSC Johnson's apparent immunity to the Flood, which would almost certainly guarantee his death in an attempt to reverse engineer this trait. Chief ultimately decides to withhold this information, saving Johnson's life and setting the seeds of the rogue soldier above the UNSC command structure that would come to be a major part of his character during 343's stewardship of the franchise. Ultimately, the human survivors learn that the Covenant have found the location of Earth and are preparing a huge invasion fleet at the station Unyielding Hierophant. Master Chief and company manage to plant a bomb on the station, and Whitcomb pilots the Ascendant Justice near the station, luring in and wiping out the Covenant fleet in the resulting explosion. With humanity only temporarily saved, the survivors rush back to Earth to prepare for the next attack, and most importantly, getting Chief back on Earth in time for Halo 2's opening cutscene. In many ways, the tension between Bungie and Microsoft over the expanded universe leaves First Strike often more focused on following up its own established plot threads and running interference for why characters don't appear in the games, than existing for its own story and character. But Nylund also took time to lay seeds for Ackerson's shadowy Spartan 3 program and set up events for his own follow-up. No longer would Halo novels presume that they could be standalone and self-contained. This was a franchise, after all. It'd be a bit reductive to say that the end result of First Strike is merely stuff happens and alien ships get blown up, but that's mostly what it boils down to. The events of the novel can be removed from memory, and Halo 2 plays the exact same. While a few Spartans survived to fight another day, Chief would remain the last Spartan as far as anyone only playing the games were concerned. Rather, First Strike's initial contribution to the series was setting the pattern many pieces of Halo expanded media would later replicate. Humanity finds some Forerunner relic and destroys it to stop the Covenant from getting their hands on it. Like the fall of Reach, there were some elements Bungie clearly did not like in First Strike, and went out of their way to retcon, namely Johnson's immunity to the Flood, which they made sure to cast doubt on with the Halo graphic novel. In the same vein as the fall of Reach and the Flood, First Strike also suffers from coming early in the franchise and establishing elements to the series that would be retrofitted earlier into the chronology of the universe, making them redundant. Humanity's first encounter with the Brutes would be retconned, much like the dates of face-to-face encounters with other Covenant species or the issue date of the battle rifle. Halsey's uncanny ability to tell the Spartans apart despite their identical armor would be left dismantled and superfluous in later depictions, as the Spartans all gained drastically varied Mjolnir armor from initial deployment. Like its predecessors, First Strike was a critical and commercial success, becoming the first New York Times bestseller of the franchise. It ended up serving as the middle chapter in a loose trilogy of Nylund books, motivating the events of Nylund's next, and to date, final novel in the Halo universe, which we'll cover next time on Hindsight Halo. Thanks for watching this video. You can check out podcasts and other videos on our channel or our written content at forwarduntodawn.com. Please subscribe and share the video if you liked it, and see you online.